When we're using the Enneagram for inner development, whether that's personal or professional, understanding our subtype pattern is really key because it provides a specificity and a nuance to our motivations in a way that just looking at our core type patterns doesn't quite land. We need it to understand why we're behaving the way we are, why we're making decisions, why we get this anxiety, why we struggle with certain things over and over again, why we do the things that we do. And subtype speaks to that really clearly. And I think it's really essential that we understand it. The other thing that's really important to understand about subtype is that for the 27 subtypes, the growth pathways or the activities that you need to do to start deconstructing some of those patterns to create some more space to expand beyond those motivations and to have more choice, it's very different. There's 27 very different pathways to growth or activities or growth activities that you need to do in order to expand out of whatever your pattern is. So I'd like to start by giving you an overview of the 27 subtypes. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth. I'm not going to talk about the growth pathways, but just so you understand what creates each subtype and just a few things about how it shows up differently than the primary type, as well as looking at some of the mistypes that are pretty common. But first, I'm Samantha Mackay, an Enneagram coach. I particularly focus on helping people navigate their mid-career crisis and helping understand what has shifted between their priorities, between their younger self and the self that's going into the future. So let's start by just briefly talking about what a subtype is, because the subtype is an energetic blend of the passion of the primary type and then one of three survival instincts that the Enneagram speaks to. So let's talk about the passion first. The passion is the word for the core emotional distortion that happens inside the Enneagram type, inside the archetypal pattern for each of these types as they're described. What does all of that mean? Well, passion means to suffer. It is a form of suffering that comes from a distorted sense of how we emotionally see the world around us. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with the four primary emotions because we all experience those, but through the lens of our passion, we experience them differently. For example, some people feel a lot of fear and others don't feel any at all, but everyone's experiencing the same amount of fear. It's just distorted through this passion. So another word for passion is emotional distortion or chief feature. There are a number of different ways people describe it. There are 9 passions, starting with type 8. It's lust, sloth, anger, pride, self-deceit, envy, avarice, fear, and gluttony for type 7. Now, I know some of those words are a little bit archaic or old language, and as we go through this video, I'll mention what they mean in more plain language. Now for the 3 survival instincts. It's self-preservation, social belonging, and sexual fusion. Self-preservation is that drive we have to protect our physical body, to stay warm, to have shelter, to have resources. And so often there's a focus on material security and money and houses and clothes, and taking care of our physical self and our physical being. Social belonging focuses on our role in groups or communities, often having a lot to do with how much standing or power we have to do with other members. For example, if you're in a group at work or a community group, do you take on the role of president or secretary or treasurer? Do you take the minutes? If you're on a sporting team, are you the coach? What position are you playing on the field? These are sort of more questions of social belonging. And then finally, sexual fusion focuses on our one-to-one relationships. Who are we close to? How easy is it for us to connect for others? Do we find ourselves merging with important individuals or creating a lot of distance from them? So these survival instincts, it sounds like they're just covering these 3 areas of life, but there's actually a lot of complexity in there, which again, I'll save for another time. Now, one other question I get asked a lot is, why do we all look so different? If there's only 27 types, why do we still look all so different? And that's because we're very much influenced by the world we grew up in and the experiences we had as a child. That can include the culture we were raised in, the economic experience we had, what resources we had access to, the educational experiences we had, our parents' parenting style, any inherited trauma that we're carrying around, any natural disasters we experienced. All of those things shape how we see the world. And so our subtype, because it's influenced by these survival instincts, when we had these adverse experiences that particularly relate to those instincts, that's where we're going to be more defended And we're going to react more strongly in our subtype pattern and our defensive system, because they are coping strategies, will react more strongly around events that most relate to or are very similar to that original struggle or wound or experience, because that's where we're going to need that coping mechanism more to defend us from that underlying pain, which is what the point of personality is. So with all that in mind, let's leap into our brief overview of the 27 subtypes. So let's start with type 1. Now, the passion or the emotional distortion for ones is anger. Now, this isn't anger in the way you and I might think about it, but rather this is more a drive for perfection or a resentment of having to work before play, of duty ahead of enjoyment. And so when you combine that with the survival instincts, it becomes 3 different ways to demonstrate being virtuous or good or perfect in the world. So if you start with self-preservation 1, also known as worry, that's a focus on perfecting oneself. It's less about perfecting the world around them or role modeling perfection for others. It's how can I perfect myself? And so because that's turned inwards, there's very little access to that anger, and then far more an internal experience of anxiety. So externally, self-pres ones tend to look very warm and friendly and kind. Internally, they're incredibly self-critical and far more aware of that worry or anxiety as they strive to be perfect. But the challenge is you can never actually perfect yourself, and so it becomes a never-ending struggle for self-pres ones. Because of that anxiety or that worry, they can look like self-preservation 6s. Now, for the social ones, also known as non-adaptability or rigidity, these ones role model perfection for others. So they're less worried than the self-pres ones, because once they've found the right way to do something, that anxiety is gone. They just do it the right way, the way they consider it to be the right way, and they just keep doing that. And that's why it's called non-adaptability, because once they've found the right way, it's very difficult for a social one to consider the need for changing or updating or acknowledging a different perspective. So social ones often find themselves in the roles of teachers or educators because it's very easy for them to role model the right way to do something. They tend to be a bit cooler and a bit more intellectual than other ones, and so can be mistaken for a 5. And that brings us to the sexual one. Now, this is known as zeal because they have a little more access to that anger, and it's focused on reforming others and society. So they're less self-critical, although still self-critical, but less self-critical and more critical of others and the world around them for not meeting the standards that they believe are necessary to maintain a good and proper society in whatever that looks like. And so these are the ones that are known more as reformers rather than perfectionists. And because of this drive to reform others, they can be very passionate about the standards that they're trying to increase, and they have more access to that anger to demonstrate the frustration at those standards or their ideals not being met. Because of that extra assertiveness, they can be mistaken for 8s. Now for 2s. So the passion or emotional distortion for 2s is pride. And pride is focused on a need to charm or please others as a way to get one's own needs met through the support of others. Now, this isn't all needs, but it's usually the needs they had to disown or weren't allowed to claim from their younger years. So that will look different for every 2. But really, it's a way of seducing others in some form. And through the instincts, we see that expressed in 3 different ways. So the self-preservation 2 is known as charm, and they're seducing through this sort of child, playful-like way, the way you might see a young child being cute and friendly and charming. Self-pres 2s can sometimes feel like they're a child in search of an adult and looking for someone to take responsibility or to tell them what to do. Unlike other 2s, they can be more fearful about connection and can be more withdrawing, particularly when they're hurt. But they don't necessarily appear as helpful as the stereotype suggests that all 2s are. But as they are very sensitive to rejection and can withdraw, they can be mistaken for 4s and 6s. Next is the social 2, known as ambition. And this is very easily confused for 3s and 8s, because we don't expect 2s to be powerful and influential and in these strong leadership positions. But that's exactly where we tend to find the social 2. They are ambitious, focused on seducing groups, often in a leadership position, with a focus on being powerful, influential, and strategic. There's very much a giving to get approach that happens for the social two here, whether they realize it or not. They're very generous. They work very hard and they're highly competent in whatever their chosen field is. And then finally, we have the sexual two, which is known as the best friend, or sometimes that sort of femme fatale don Juan type. They're very much focused on seducing another person with the aim of having that person completely take care of them and meet all their needs. They are this force of nature, wild and confident and emotional, but they experience intense anguish when the relationship ends. And so they can be mistaken for sexual for. Okay, type threes. Now, the passion or the chief feature or emotional distortion here is self-deceit. And self-deceit is a form of self-forgetting, but in the sense of we forget that we're wearing a persona. We take on a role and we forget that that's the role we're playing. And this is why type threes are quite good at shape shifting to become what others value or others want them to be in terms of success. And when you combine that with the three survival instincts, it becomes three different ways of performing success in some form. And so the self-preservation three is known as security, and it's very much a strong focus on material security and ensuring they and the people they love have everything they need. What's underneath this self-deceit, though, is a vanity for having no vanity. They're incredibly hardworking, are very modest. They don't brag about their achievements. Unlike other threes, they're not going to be driving the fancy car and having the corner office. They're going to be in the grungy clothes, driving the cheap car. But that is part of the strategy to appear good according to social consensus. They can appear like a one because they're very focused on excellence and have very high standards. But unlike ones, it's a focus on what others see as successful, whereas for ones, that comes more from their own internal standards. Now, the social three is known as prestige, and this is the more stereotypical three that we're familiar with. They tend to be very well dressed, very showy. They work hard, they look good, they get the job done, they're fantastic public speakers, they're very persuasive, they get a lot of applause and recognition, they're socially brilliant and very competitive, and they can be confused for eights. Of course, the struggle for social threes is to realize that still part of that is a mask and they're not in touch with their true values and what they really like and what's important to them. And then finally, sexual threes are known as charisma or masculine feminine, but they're focused on others' success, very much supporting and cheerleading others in any way they can. They are hardworking, but always in an effort to make someone else look good. They tend to be very shy and sweet and emotional, and so they can look like twos or sevens. And you can see here, even within just this range of threes, how different those motivations are and how very different growth pathways would be needed in order to start expanding out of those patterns. But one of the biggest variations in the subtypes is in type 4. So for 4s, the chief feature is envy, and that's a focus on comparing oneself to others and seeing what I lack. And that expresses itself in three different ways. So firstly, with the self-preservation 4, that's known as tenacity. This is a stoicism. So as opposed to dwelling in that lacking, they go out and get it. They get into action and work hard to get whatever it is they see themselves as missing. However, no matter how hard they work for it, they never seem to have or fulfill that lack. It's always present in some way. But unlike the stereotypical 4, they appear to be very happy because in their stoicism, they're smiling through the pain. They're working hard without complaining. That is part of the pattern. They can be very masochistic and they don't share their feelings. So because of this, they can look like 1s, 3s, 5s, and 7s. And the self-pres 4 can be one of the least understood or hardest identified types of the 27 because it is just so different from that stereotypical description. Now, the social 4 is the stereotypical 4. It is the long-suffering 4, and it's known as inadequacy or shame. The social 4 over-identifies with their feelings and then seeks to earn appreciation or love or connection through that suffering. So others can really see them as being very dramatic or complaining, but there's this sense of I must share my suffering with others. And whenever they compare themselves to others, they always find themselves as being worse off in some way. Now, that's unlike the sexual 4. They're known as competition. And when they see themselves as something lacking, they demand that someone else provide it. Hence, this 4 is more angry, more assertive. They see others as the cause of their suffering. And so they can be more assertive about demanding what they need or what they see as lacking. And because of this aggression or anger, they can be confused with eights. Now, next is fives. And externally, all fives can look very similar. And so when you're a five and you're trying to figure out which subtype you are, it's very much going inwards and really trying to see these patterns very clearly within you. So the passion for five is avarice, and this is our withholding. It's not about greed in the money sense, but it's a holding on to my time and my resources in the belief that they are limited. If they lose anything, they'll never recover. So they minimize their needs to have as little as possible and they hold on to that. So the first type of five is known as castle, and they have very strong boundaries. So the self-preservation five almost builds themselves a room or a castle with very strong walls, with a locked door that no one can get into unless they say so. Inside of this room is everything they need. Now, that doesn't mean they don't leave this space and go out and hang out with people, but it's always there when they need to withdraw and recharge and have whatever they need. They will appear warm and friendly, but they will still need a lot of alone time to process thoughts and feelings. Now, the social five can be confused as a seven because they appear to others to be very social and very chatty, particularly about their areas of expertise. So they hoard knowledge, particularly about the things they're interested in order to talk about those. This five is known as the totem, and they have very high ideals, and they have a real fear of life being meaningless. They're always in search of what is really meaningful to them. Sexual five is known as confidence or seeking trust. Again, this is about finding one person that they can open up to and have a real deep connection with. The challenge with that is they don't open up to that person first. They expect the other person to open up. But of course, connection begets connection. And so they can often struggle to feel connected deeply and have the relationship they're seeking. But because they are more emotional and more intense and more romantic, they can be confused for fours. Sixes are another space where the subtypes look vastly different. Here we're talking about the passion of fear. And when combined with the instincts, that's three different ways to be fearful of what's going to happen in the future and three different reactions to fear. Self-preservation sixes is known as warmth. They're very friendly and very warm in order to attract protectors and friendly alliances. They're very doubting, very questioning. It's very difficult for them to be certain about something. They doubt their own doubt. They find it hard to trust themselves. They question everything and see things in shades of grey. But because of that warmth, they can appear like twos or nines. The social six is known as duty, and they are overly certain. Their response to fear is to find an authority or an ideology or a system that they can follow. And in following the rule or that authority, they can relax. They don't need to worry about fear as long as they're doing the right thing according to the system that they're following. So they tend to be more dutiful, more responsible, more intellectual. At times, they can be too certain about what needs to be done or the path forward. Because of that, they can look like ones or threes. Now, the sexual six is known as strength. One way we respond to fear is through that fight approach or being assertive or going on the offense as opposed to being on the defense. And that's the sexual six's approach, to always be on the offense and using their strength. Now, strength can come in a variety of forms. We can be intellectually strong, we can be beautiful, we can be physically strong. It can come out in different ways. But the sexual six tends to be risk takers and troublemakers and rebels. They tend to play devil's advocate a lot and be contrarian, but others will perceive them as intimidating in some way. Sexual six can be confused for eights. Right, that leads us to sevens and gluttony. Gluttony isn't about eating. It's about wanting variety. It's about wanting to have a little bit of stimulation from so many different sources that you're always distracted from the pain you're trying to avoid. And each subtype of seven has a gluttony for something different. So the self-pres seven is known as opportunity. And so this is where they create a network of people that they like who can help them meet their needs, their material needs or their needs for fun or distraction, whatever the case may be. So it's through this network of alliances that they can get their needs met. They tend to be very practical, pragmatic, resourceful, cheerful, talkative, and good at getting what they want. However, they can be quite anxious underneath and so can seem six-ish at times. Now, the second type of seven is the social seven, and they're very easily confused for twos or nines because they go against gluttony. Whereas the seven is stereotypically selfish, the social seven is unselfish, go against self-interest by being anti-gluttonous or selfless. It's an ideal they're trying to achieve through their selflessness. And so they will take the smallest piece of cake instead of the largest. Well, the self-pres 7 will absolutely take the largest piece of cake. Social 7s work hard to relieve others' pain and will sacrifice themselves for the benefit of others, and often find themselves in roles like grief counselor or doctor or nurse because it's taking away others' pain. Now, the third type of 7, the sexual 7, is known as suggestibility or fascination. And this is more the stereotypical 7. They're full of life and enthusiasm, constantly wear rose colored glasses about how everything can look great in life. They are idealistic, imaginative dreamers who embellish reality and see it only for its best and it's for its potential. They can be overly enthusiastic, optimistic, and at times can be a bit naive. They can be mistaken for 9s. Now, 8's passion is lust. Now, this isn't so much about sexual desire, but as a lust for life. And this is an excessiveness for one thing. So if you've got a buffet in front of you, the 7 will try a little bit of everything. The 8 will just eat everything of their favorite foods. The one thing they love, they'll just eat it all. And so this excessiveness or the excessive energy presents in 3 different ways. Now, the self-preservation 8 is known as satisfaction. And these guys can look quite 5-ish because they simply just identify what it is they want and they just go out and get it. They don't need to talk about it. They don't need to ask permission. They just quickly figure out the fastest way to get what it is they need, and they just make it happen. They're very self-contained, focused on comfort, making sure they have their material resources or needs met, and they don't ask for help. They just do it. Next is the social 8, known as solidarity, very much focused on injustice. Now, all 8s have a theme about fairness, justice, and rectifying injustice when they see it. But it's a stronger theme for the social 8. They're more mellow, they're more friendly, they're really focused on mentoring and empowering and supporting others in some way, and are likely to be directly involved in protecting the weak or the vulnerable in some way. They can be confused for 2s or 9s. The third way for 8s is known as the center of things or possession. Sexual 8s are more passionate, charismatic, rebellious, emotional, and sensual. They focus on being the center of attention and can use their energy to magnetize a room. They can be confused for sexual 4s. Now, the 9's emotional distortion or chief feature is known as sloth. And this isn't about them being lazy. 9s are incredible hard workers. The sloth is more a self-forgetting. They forget about their own priorities, their own wants and agendas, and set those aside in order to help and support others. And in that self-forgetting process, they often merge with something else in order to maintain that feeling of calm internally and externally that they seek. And so for the self-preservation 9, they merge with comfortable routines. This pattern can be known as appetite, but really it's a sense of merging with things that are comfortable. So that might be eating, sleeping, watching television, but it can also be making sure you have your coffee at the same time every day, doing a puzzle on the weekend, doing Sudoku or crosswords. They'll definitely have a comfortable chair that they can sink into exactly when they need it. That's very important to them, but it is understanding what the routine is that they're merging with. The self-pres 9s can be more irritable and stubborn and practical than the other 9s. And so they can appear a little 8-ish, but underneath there is still this merging with a routine, a comfortable routine that's going on. Now, the social 9 is known as participation. This is very much a focus on groups. The social 9 is even more hardworking than the 3 because they're very much focused on participating and having a role in as many groups as possible. They tend to be very busy in their work, community, and family groups in some way and wanting to belong to as many groups as possible. Because they're so hardworking, they can be mistaken for 2s and 3s. And then the final subtype is known as sexual 9, which is known as merger or fusion. Sexual 9 really merges with another person, taking on their feelings, their values, their beliefs, their perspectives. They almost become the other person, completely forgetting their own views, feelings, and beliefs and values. They can really start to mimic their partner, even if they don't mean to. Sexual 9s have to work very hard to find themselves in relationships, often need to spend quite a bit of time alone to sort through what is theirs and what is someone else's. But they're a lot more sweeter and shy and more emotional than the other 9, so they can be confused for 2s and 3s and 4s. Okay, so that was a very brief overview of the 27 subtypes. You can see how at that motivational level, they're all very different, even if on the surface and what you see in people can look very similar. Underneath, there are very different 27 hidden motivations there. And you can see how understanding which of those drives is holding your structure in place is going to be very useful to helping start to reshape that and create more space within your internal psyche, your internal systems. If you'd like to go deeper, I encourage you to read The Complete Enneagram by Beatrice Chestnut or take a test that explores subtypes, such as the Integrative 9 or the CP Enneagram Compass are two good places to start for exploring subtypes. And there's a range of great podcasts that do panels for each of the subtypes. The Art of Growth has a great one. That's it for me for now. We will undoubtedly go deeper into this again soon. Feel free to check out all of the creativity and Enneagram interviews I've done, which focus on a specific subtype, which can help you start to see what these patterns look like in real life. All right, until then, enjoy.